Hi, my name is Lucy Huxley. I'm a whore, and welcome to my bedroom. Today's episode is a bit of a part two to the last episode. We're going to talk all about BDSM, but this time I am answering your guys' questions. Before I did the last episode, I put up a question box on my Instagram, and you guys gave me some really great questions, which is why I decided to make it a separate episode. Make sure you're following me on Instagram at Lucy Huxley X. I always put up my question boxes on there. So if you ever want to ask something and have it answered in an episode, that's where you can do it. We've got quite a variety of questions about BDSM. So let's just dive straight into it. The first question is BDSM role playing or sexual activity, or is it both? BDSM can be role playing, or it can be sexual activity, or it can be both, or it can be neither. Just to reiterate, the definition of BDSM is bondage, discipline, dominance, submission, sadism, and masochism. So it's anything that falls underneath those 6 words. So you can do things like bondage and sadism and discipline without sexual activity. BDSM does not exclusively have to be sexual. And you can also do these things with or without role play. You can role play as a different part of yourself or as a certain character, or it can just be you doing these activities. So yeah, it can be either or both. I'd like to ask, what does a 24/7 dom-sub relationship look like? Besides the collar and stuff, how is it practiced via text? How can one manage it while studying or working? I spoke about 24/7 relationships in the last episode and my experiences with them. A 24/7 relationship just refers to a BDSM power dynamic that extends out of the bedroom and is occurring throughout your daily life. It's not exclusively in the bedroom. And there's really a wide variety of ways that you can set up these relationships and how they can play out. Every 24/7 relationship is going to be different, and it's going to have different levels of power exchange and different rules and different extents to which it affects the people's lives. It could be something super simple like wearing a collar, referring to your partner with honorifics always. So, by honorifics, I mean using titles like mistress or daddy or sir. And it can also be things like always capitalizing the pronouns you use for them. So, when you say you or he, that's always capitalized, again, to refer to their dominant position in your life. It could be the dominant person like checking in via text, and the submissive have to give the dominant an update about what they're doing and how things are going. There's really so many possibilities for it. It's hard to give examples as to, what a 24/7 relationship always looks like or what it should look like because it's inherently adapted to the relationship that it's a part of. And this person also asked, how can one manage it while studying or working? So in these types of relationships, when someone goes to school or to work, they're still being their normal selves at work. Maybe they're checking in with their dominant via text while they're working. Maybe they're wearing a discreet day collar, but otherwise they kind of go about that part of their lives as normal. So another question I got about this is, with a 24/7 dynamic, is it over every aspect of your life, or is it more like dirty talk throughout the day that is DS based? I'm curious to try, but I'm not sure how it would play out. So again, like I said, you can really adapt it to what you want. A 24/7 relationship could be something as simple as doing dirty talk throughout the day and adhering to certain small rules that don't really have a big effect on your life. Or it can be all the way up to a total power exchange, which means that the submissive person in the relationship is giving up total power to the dominant. And that is a huge spectrum to go off of. One end of the spectrum is just a little bit of dirty talk via text. The other end of the spectrum is giving up total control over your entire life. And you can really create anything in between those two extremes that you want. And if you're new to 24/7 relationships, you should definitely start on the lower end. Just start with things like doing dirty talk via text, having a few simple small rules, and then you can slowly add things in as you become more comfortable with it and as you communicate with your partner and you both want to proceed. If it is something you're interested in, I recommend doing research online just to kind of get an idea of how other people go about these relationships and to get some inspiration. I love looking on Reddit or on blogs or on social media to see like how other people have these relationships set up and kind of pull inspiration from different places to decide how you want to set it up if it's something you're interested in doing. Another question I got about it is, do 24/7 dynamics have moments when it stops? And yes, most of the time they do. But again, it depends on the relationship. I know that in some more extreme TPE relationships, there aren't moments where it stops. It's really 24/7. In the ones that I've been in, we have had dedicated moments where we come out of the dynamic to discuss things. One of the 24/7 relationships I was in, we would have a dedicated time once a week to come out of our power exchange roles and kind of just discuss how things were going in the relationship. In my other relationship, I would just say, hey, can we come out of our roles to discuss something? I was free to bring that up whenever I wanted. I know in some relationships, they'll maybe have a signal or something to signify that they want to come out of the power dynamic and discuss something as equals or discuss the relationship in a bigger picture. And I think a healthy part of these dynamics is coming out of your power exchange when you have arguments. What is your most taboo kink? I feel like this one is kind of subjective because the most taboo thing is very subjective. What I think is super taboo might be not super taboo to another person. But if I had to say, I guess my most taboo kink is CNC, which stands for consensual non-consent, which is just kind of the proper way to say rape play. And I'm interested in doing this on the receiving end. I've never been interested in enacting CNC on someone else. And my CNC kink is quite chill as far as CNC kinks go. I know some people have a thing for maybe pretending to be kidnapped and fighting back against the other person. Mine is not that extreme. I'm just into verbally saying no to the other person, obviously in a safe and consensual way. This is why it's called CNC, consensual non-consent, because the consensual part is very important. It's something that needs to be discussed beforehand, and a safe word or a safe signal or both needs to be set up so that me or the submissive person in general can withdraw consent at any time. But yeah, I would say that's my most taboo kink nowadays. Have you ever been consensually pushed to your absolute limit and loved it? Yes, I have. I think that's one of my favorite parts about BDSM is trusting someone enough as a submissive, trusting someone enough to take you to your limits. And it can be such a powerful and beautiful experience to go through that. And this is what a lot of people refer to as edge play. So playing on the edge of your limits. If you're going to do play that is this extreme, like really on the edge of what you feel safe with, on the edge of what you feel comfortable with, it is so important to do it with somebody that you trust and somebody that you know is going to be there for you for aftercare and to help you process anything that might come up when you're doing this type of extreme play. What's your opinion on CNC? Is it something you do with clients or exclusive to your personal sex life? Yeah, so back to like I said, I love it. It is a kink of mine, but not to an extreme level. CNC is one of those kinks that gets a bad rap from rad femmes and people who are against kink and stuff because it is consensually enacting rape, which obviously is really triggering for a lot of people, and I understand that. But the key part is the consensual part. And it can also actually be a really healing activity for people who have been through sexual assault. A lot of people who have been through that actually end up getting turned on by CNC fantasies. And it gives us the ability to act out that taboo fantasy in a consensual and safe dynamic where we have control to stop things if we want to. The other day I was watching Contrapoints video on Twilight. So if you don't know, Contrapoints is a really amazing YouTuber. She makes these long form videos about different philosophical topics, but she makes them really entertaining and digestible. I highly recommend her content, but I especially recommend the recent video she did about Twilight, like the movie series. But the reason why I'm bringing this up now is she kind of uses Twilight as a Trojan horse to talk about sexual desire and kink and gender and all of these really interesting topics. And one of the things she discusses in the video is about how CNC or like variations of it have actually been long-standing fantasies for women, and we can see this throughout history. When you look back at the very first romance novels that were ever created, you start to see this kind of theme of this good girl being like taken away and ravished by a bad boy, which is obviously not as extreme as CNC, but it's kind of this like theme of this beautiful, innocent woman being like ruined by a bad man who is more powerful than her, right? This is a really consistent theme in romance novels, and it has been for centuries. It's a consistent theme with women in Western society that we have this fantasy and this desire to be taken by someone who is stronger and more powerful than us. The theory she discusses about why women are so commonly into this fantasy, of course men can have this fantasy as well, but it is really pervasive in our society among women, is that it enables us to enact our sexual desires without being the one who desires those things. Because as women in society, especially in purity culture, we are taught that being pure and being good and not taking control of your own sexual desires is the best thing you can be as a woman, right? So these types of fantasies enable us to maintain that purity because, oh no, we don't want to have sex with a bad man while still getting that sexual satisfaction, right? It gives us an avenue to explore these more out there sexual fantasies without giving up the purity that we long for because society tells us that purity, that innocence is what makes us good women. So I think that's a super interesting perspective to look at CNC with. And the second part of this question was, is this something I do with clients or is it exclusive to your personal sex life? This is not something I do with clients. As I mentioned in the previous episode, I'm relatively vanilla with my clients. I do offer like soft submission to clients I have seen before, but I would never do something as extreme as CNC as a submissive. As far as doing it as a dominant, it's not something that I have any interest in, so I don't think I would ever offer it. That's quite intense as far as domination goes, and I don't offer anything really intense to my clients. So, yeah, it's really exclusive to my personal sex life. My partner and I are into rope and shibari, but we have no experience and we are struggling to learn. There are videos that are somewhat helpful, but I really wish there were classes or BDSM clubs. But as I can't find any info about them publicly, do you have any recommendations? So I do have a couple of recommendations. One is the website Shibari Study. Gorgon, who is a really amazing Shibari artist that I've worked with before, created that website, and it is the best online resource that I know of to learn Shibari. They have a really extensive, beautiful library of videos. I actually modeled for a couple of them. If you're looking for online stuff, I really recommend it. But with everything in BDSM and especially Shibari, I do think it is really important to learn it in person. If you're looking for in-person classes or events, I recommend looking on the website FetLife. That will be kind of the directory for kinky events and classes and even just meetups around you. In most decent-sized cities, there's going to be FetLife meetups and events. In all large cities, there's meetups and events. If you live in a small city, it is going to be more difficult. I don't know exactly what city you live in and what the kink community is like where you live, but it might be worth driving over to the nearest big city to go to some of these classes or meetups or events if it's something that you're interested in. Is there any kink that you're curious about but will never try? No, I don't think so. I mean, in general, I'm the type of person where if I want to do something, I will do it. And like I spoke about in the last episode, especially when I was younger, I had more crazier kinks and I kind of did everything. And there isn't really anything left that I still want to try that I haven't already gotten to experience. And yeah, if something did come up, I can't really think of anything that I would be interested in that I would be unwilling to try enacting in real life. Do you offer kink or BDSM with clients, or is that unsafe? I understand professional dominatrix services, but being tied up or on the receiving end of BDSM with strangers or clients seems like a bigger risk. Yes, it is definitely a bigger risk, and this is why I don't offer anything beyond kind of softcore submission with clients. It's also just not something I'm really comfortable with. I will say I do know that there are people who are professional submissives. So they will be on the receiving end of BDSM and they do this for a living. And like I said, I don't have any personal experience with this, but I would love to in the future have a pro sub on my podcast. I'm actually going to get a second microphone and set things up so that I can do interviews on the podcast for you guys, which I'm really excited about. And hopefully at some point I'll have a pro sub on so I can ask them these questions like how do they mitigate the safety issues and what it's like for them. How much drug usage is accepted in the straight BDSM world? I think this is a super interesting question. And also that the person who asked this specified the straight BDSM world, because from my understanding as a straight person, chemsex, which refers to sex while high on drugs, is a lot more common and accepted in gay culture than it is in straight culture. In a lot of BDSM and kink communities, there is a huge pushback against using any sort of drugs while doing BDSM because drugs do alter your mind, right? And when you're playing with really extreme things in BDSM, it's really important to be in a right state of mind and not be taking anything that could affect your consent or make you want to try something that you would maybe say no to when you were sober, right? It's really important to be aware of these things. Most in-person BDSM communities will be pretty against using any sort of drugs while playing, but there's obviously always exceptions to this, right? There's always going to be people who will get high off their face and do BDSM. Like, we can't control what people do in private. But overall, in public BDSM communities, drug usage is not so accepted. But then also with weed usage becoming more acceptable, I know there's a lot of people who smoke weed very often and they don't feel like it affects their mind a lot. So they will definitely do BDSM scenes after they've smoked weed. So I don't think there's a super hard line, but doing any sort of hard drugs is generally looked down upon. I myself have done BDSM scenes while high on hard drugs in my early 20s in Berlin when I was partying all the time. But I would only do that with partners that I knew, who I was really comfortable with, and we knew each other's limits and boundaries. I would never do a BDSM scene on hard drugs with someone I had just met for the first time. I think that's an awful idea, and I really don't recommend doing that. Drugs in general, anything that alters your mind, you should be super careful with in BDSM and really know how it affects you, know how it affects your partner, and yeah, don't take it lightly. All right, we've got 2 related questions here. What role has the patriarchy played in dominance and submission? Do you feel BDSM would be different if society wasn't patriarchal? In your opinion, do you think male dominants get pleasure from controlling their submissive woman from a place of patriarchal standards? I love these questions. I definitely think that BDSM is affected by patriarchy. I think objectively it's affected by it because our desires and what we do sexually does not exist in a vacuum. A lot of BDSM and kinky desires stem from the fact that these are taboo things in our lives, right? The fact that they are taboos and that they are looked down upon by society or looked down upon by parts of ourselves is what makes them so intriguing to us. So obviously the things that society considers taboo is going to affect these types of desires, right? And you can look at this both ways when it comes to men and women within BDSM, or people who have been negatively affected by the patriarchy versus the people who benefit from it. I know that there's cis men out there who grew up feeling a bit ashamed of their masculinity because they don't want to participate in patriarchy. They don't necessarily have an outlet to express their anger or their more dominant feelings, and BDSM can give them a safe place to consensually express those things. Creating this safe space for them to express their desire to take control, to express their desire for dominance. And then I also think that there's men who are quite patriarchal themselves, and BDSM gives them a safe place to kind of continue to fulfill this patriarchal standard, right? That they should be the one who's dominant and that having power over somebody else gets them off. Adding the BDSM framework into that and a priority for consent is a much safer way for these people to express that. And then on the other side, for so many men, being submissive is so taboo, right? Because society teaches men to be in control and the ones doing the work and making all the decisions, and they shouldn't have feelings. And being in a submissive role gives them a place to escape from that. And then it's all the same reversed on the female side, right? As a woman, being dominant is so taboo because it's so against the narrative that society tells us about how we should be as women. And it can be such a beautiful way for us to reclaim our power and reclaim our sexual desires. Yes, I want this, and I'm going to tell you how to do it, and I'm going to have power over you in this sexual situation. That's definitely not the entire reason why women being dominant enjoy it, but it's definitely part of it. The way we live our lives every day, the way we are treated by other people and society affects every part of our lives. So yeah, BDSM would definitely be different if society wasn't patriarchal, but I don't know exactly how different it would be because it's so difficult to even imagine a society that isn't patriarchal because it's so ingrained in every aspect of all of our lives, right? Again, the second question here was, do you think that male dominants get pleasure from controlling their submissive woman from a place of patriarchal standards? Yeah, I think it's definitely part of it for some men. I can't say what it's like for every man. But of course, when men are raised to believe that having control over women makes them better men, it makes sense that they would also want to express that sexually as well. I think it's a super interesting thing to interrogate, especially on yourself, to think about how your desires for dominance or submission play into the beliefs you have about men and women and the patriarchy. Obviously, as I'm discussing these things, I'm talking mostly about cis het people. But yeah, it's one of those things that I think is kind of an endlessly interesting conversation. What are your favorite BDSM practices? It's a good question. I mean, choking is really my bread and butter. I used to joke that I'm not interested in having sex unless someone's being choked, which isn't super true anymore. But yeah, that is like really one of my favorite things. Bondage, another classic. I also love breath play, which is important to note is different than choking. If you are restricting someone's breath by choking them, that's very dangerous. That means you're crushing their windpipe. Don't do that. Breath play should be done by specifically covering the person's nose and mouth. You could also do it with gear, like different masks and stuff for breath play, but the simple way to do it is just with your hands. And the second part of this question is what would you never do? I think I would probably never do scat play, so playing with poo. I just really have no desire for that, and that obviously has risks with the bacteria and stuff, and it's just something I have no interest in. Aside from that, if you listen to my last episode, you know that I've experimented with a lot of things. I've already experimented with blood, which is a hard no for a lot of people. I'm really not a fan of sensory deprivation, like wearing blindfolds. That's also a hard limit of mine, no blindfolds. Most other things, I feel like I'm pretty open to. I mean, kink is so endless. I'm sure there's things that I'm not even thinking of that people would be like, oh, what about this crazy thing? But I can't really think of anything else at the moment that I'm like, wow, I would never even try to touch that in my life. Do you think you'll ever get bored with BDSM and want to go back to vanilla? No. I mean, BDSM is so endless, right? And it's also just so fucking hot to me. I did have a period of like almost 2 years where I was vanilla during my last relationship. And I recommend listening to episode 4, I think it is, the one about dating, if you want to hear more about my experience with that. But after that relationship, I really went through this reawakening of rediscovering my kinky side and realizing that, fuck, my kinky side never left. It's still 100% here. And I think that really made me value kink and BDSM. I was like, fuck, I'm never going to be in a relationship again that doesn't include this aspect because it's so important to me and so exciting to me and so fulfilling and so hot. So yeah, I think one period of 2 years of being vanilla was enough for me. I don't need to do that again. Does it really feel liberating to be submissive? Yes, it does. And that's one of the reasons I love it. Just not having to worry about anything because the other person is handling everything else. I feel like being submissive in sex is one of the times where my mind is the most calm. I have a fairly overactive mind. I'm a Virgo moon, if you're into astrology. And it's really hard for me to calm down my mind. Even when I'm like lying in Shavasana at the end of yoga class, my mind is still going, just thinking about random fucking shit. When I'm trying to fall asleep at night, my mind is going, thinking about random shit. But when I'm being dominated well in bed and having good sex, that's when my mind shuts up, you know? I'm only thinking about what's going on in the moment and maybe thinking about fantasies I have that add to it. And I'm not thinking about anything else. And that is really fucking nice and really fucking freeing, in my opinion, you know? To have this moment of calm and quiet and not have to think about anything. I don't have to think about what I'm going to do next. I don't have to think about where I should put my arms or what's going on. It's the other person's job to handle all of that. I just get to enjoy it and be free in that moment, and I fucking love it. Do you think findom is a valid kink? What are your experiences with it? So, for those who don't know, findom refers to financial domination, and in general, this is guys who get off on giving their money to beautiful women. And it can be as simple as sending money to them, or it can be more extreme financial control, like the other person having control over the bank account or their cards and things like this. I do definitely think findom is a valid kink. I mean, if anyone says that something is a kink, I'm not going to be the person to invalidate that and say that's not real. I definitely think it's valid. There's definitely a lot of women who are in the findom space who are more interested in the money than really the kink side of it. I don't have a ton of experience with it. I did have one fin sub briefly in like 2017, and this is when I was a model, and it was just someone who had reached out to me on Instagram. It was basically like, I want to be your fin sub. And he bought me a few really nice things, and I really enjoyed it. But that's really the limit of my experience. I am not the most experienced person or knowledgeable person about it. As a woman who wants to explore being a sub with a male dominant, how do you know that someone is fit to be a dom, especially if the dynamic is romantic and not just sexual? How do you find a partner in the BDSM realm? What red and green flags do you watch out for? So, I think the most important thing when looking for a dominant as a woman, as a straight woman, is looking for a man that you trust and that you feel safe with. If you don't have those two things, it's not going to work and it's not worth it. You need to trust them. You need to feel safe with them. They need to be someone who is willing to listen and who does not get defensive about criticism, because inherently part of communication when you are doing BDSM is giving feedback about, yes, this worked for me or this didn't work for me. And if someone is defensive about that type of feedback and gets upset when someone says they did something wrong, that can create a really emotionally unsafe situation. And yeah, I think that they should be reliable and in touch with their emotions. As far as red flag, I would watch out if they get angry easily. You know, if something goes wrong when you're out on the public date and they get annoyed at a waitress or something like that, if they have that kind of quick visceral reaction of anger or frustration, I think that's a bit of a red flag, especially when it comes to someone you're looking to do BDSM with. Not listening to you, not paying attention to what you say, that's a red flag. Not prioritizing your comfort and your pleasure, that's a red flag. I could go on and on. If you're speaking to a potential dom who has experience with BDSM, one question that I think is really good to ask is, what experiences have you had where your submissive has had to safe word, and how did you deal with that? How did you end the scene? Where did things go from there? The way that someone deals with a safe word is going to tell you a lot about how they conduct things, and really pay attention to the way they answer that. You know, make sure that they're prioritizing the submissive comfort and that they're giving adequate aftercare, not just immediately after the scene, but also in the days following is super important. And yeah, do you feel comfortable openly communicating with this person? Do you have a feeling that you can tell them anything? That's super important, because you have to really communicate about the nitty gritty when it comes to BDSM. So if someone makes you feel like you can't say certain things or you can't show certain parts of yourselves, that's not a good dynamic to start things on. And then how do you find a partner in the BDSM realm? It's fucking hard, I'll be honest. I have found most of my partners kind of organically, and like they just happen to be kinky, or I've taught them how to be kinky. I personally have never really had particular luck with finding partners with particular like BDSM avenues, BDSM geared dating apps, or like BDSM meetups and parties and stuff. I know a lot of people use those tools to find partners. I personally haven't, but it's definitely worth trying. My approach has more been to just find people that I enjoy dating, and then hopefully we're also compatible in the bedroom, or I can teach them. I do have experience teaching men how to be dominant. How does it feel when a person you really like has a strong limit against your kink, or vice versa? When it happened to me, I haven't been able to get past it. This is an interesting question. I've definitely had partners be really against the idea of DDLG, which is something I mentioned in my past episode, but they just feel really uncomfortable with that dynamic. And that has been difficult for me. And it's another reason why I'm like scared to talk about it with new partners, especially. Yeah, it's a difficult thing. I think if something is really a strong kink of yours and is really important to your sexual satisfaction, and the other person has a strong limit against that, then maybe you guys just aren't compatible. And sometimes that sucks to accept, especially if it's someone you really like romantically or really enjoy spending time with. But, not everyone is going to be compatible when it comes to kink, especially the more extreme things. It makes sense if you have a really strong kink and someone you're interested in really has a strong limit against that. I think it's totally understandable to not really be able to move past that. If that's an integral part of your sexuality, it's important to have partners that recognize that and that can participate in that with you. I've been doing BDSM with this master on and off for about 6 months. He's married in an open relationship, and it was clear from the beginning that we both wanted sex only. Is it normal for a sub to get attached on an emotional level? Yes, it's absolutely normal. BDSM is inherently emotional. We're playing with really extreme things. Like giving up to your power to someone requires a lot of trust, and I think inherently includes some emotional entanglement, especially if it's someone that you're seeing long term. So I think it's completely normal. Also, if this person is a dominant who has a lot of experience playing with multiple subs long term, then he should also really have an understanding of that. It's probably not something that he's experienced for the first time. If he's been playing well with subs for a long time, he definitely has experienced emotional entanglement. What advice can you give to someone who really wants to try BDSM but gets embarrassed during the power dynamic or role play? I would really dive into why you get embarrassed or like what aspect of it you get embarrassed about. I feel like it's hard for me to give more advice about that without knowing the details of it, but really try to understand where this comes from. Do you feel embarrassed doing the role play in general? Do you feel embarrassed by someone else seeing you do it? Is it one specific aspect of the role play that you can maybe like tone down a little bit and work your way up to? My general advice would be to start off really small and just do small, basic things. You don't have to dive into doing a full on, super intense BDSM scene. Like, you can start small and slowly work your way up to it. And also to play with somebody that you really trust and that you feel safe with and that you feel like you can be yourself with and you know that they won't judge you. I've been quite kinky most of my sex life and got my fiance into kink, swinging, group play, and all that fun stuff. My question is, how do you reply or react when people are judgy of this? I get annoyed that vanilla people think they have a better relationship than us do to kink. Yeah, that's definitely annoying. The way I react is by really just not giving a fuck. If someone thinks that my relationships are lesser because I like being choked, I just really don't give a fuck about what people like that think. And that's my advice. Like, it doesn't fucking matter what these people think. They are not experiencing the thrills of what you are experiencing. Their lives are probably boring as fuck if they're judging you for something like this. If I think that someone is going to be judgy about things like this, I just don't tell them. It's not necessary to tell everybody about your sex life. And if there's someone that I am friends with or that I see a lot, if I realize that they're judgy about it, then I just won't bring up my sex life again. They don't deserve to know about it. What's good safety protocol around ropes or tying someone up? Are there knots that could be immediately loosened by the tied up person in an emergency? This is a really important question to ask if you're getting into bondage or shibari. I wouldn't say that there are knots that could be immediately loosened by the tied up person in an emergency because that also depends on the arm position of the person that's tied up and where their hands are. If their hands and arms are free, obviously they could quickly undo things. But if their hands are like tied behind their back, which is a really common position, then it's going to be more difficult. In my experience, the Shibari riggers who I have played with have never proposed me untying myself as a safety option. What is really common is to carry around safety shears. So there's scissors that have rounded edges that enable you to cut rope off of someone's skin really quickly and effectively without cutting into their skin. If you use regular scissors for that, the point can cut them. So always carry safety shears with you. Make sure you're working with proper shibari rope. Materials like ribbon and satin or fabric are actually incredibly difficult to untie. Like, real shibari rope is going to be the safest thing because it's the easiest to untie, it's the easiest to deal with. That's kind of the extent of my expertise because I am not a professional shibari rigger. I don't have a lot of experience doing that on the dominant side. So I would recommend doing more research into this and getting information from people who do this more full time. Is there a long-term dom-sub relationship can be equal if the roles aren't in some way interchangeable? I love this question. So this person is essentially asking, how can a relationship be equal if the two people are always in a sub and a dom role? And my answer to this is actually, how can any relationship be equal? Because inherently, with most people in our lives and most people that we enter into relationships with, we are starting off on unequal footing. As a cishet woman, when I enter into a relationship with a cishet man, we are starting that relationship on unequal footing because we live in a patriarchal society. So he automatically in life has more power than I do. We are not entering this relationship on even footing when it comes to power. And that's just an incredibly basic example. There's obviously so many different privileges that give us more power in life or take away more power from us. But I think it's incredibly rare to enter into a relationship where you are really equal in that way. All relationships have power inequalities, and the important thing is to be aware of them and to communicate about them. I don't believe that a relationship needs to be 100% on equal footing to be healthy. Obviously, if it's extremely unequal, that does kind of create a breeding ground for issues in a relationship. I don't think it being extremely unequal inherently means that there's going to be issues in the relationship, but it kind of will more easily allow for certain issues to develop, namely the person who has more power abusing that power. But I think in general, people who are really into BDSM are more aware of these power dynamics. So if they're in a sub-dom dynamic, they are consciously choosing to enter into that dynamic. They're not blindly entering a relationship unaware of the power dynamics they already have and how that affects the relationship. They're consciously choosing to create these power dynamics and communicating about it and being aware of how that affects things. So yeah, I don't think this inequality that comes from BDSM is a negative in long-term relationships. It doesn't have to be. You said you've been both a dom and a sub in these 24/7 dynamics. Is there one you felt more powerful in? Definitely when I was a dom. It's the easy answer, but it's true. Especially as a woman, being a dom can help you realize your power so much. It can be so fun and intoxicating, and yeah, it just really makes you feel badass and powerful to have that control over yourself and someone else and over your sex life and all of these things. I have a lot of kink and BDSM fantasies. My partner doesn't, but they have said that they would give anything I wanted to try a go. How can I introduce it gradually? And what is your advice about how to best communicate what you want to do? I love this question. I have a lot to say about this. My opinion is that one of the best times to talk about sex and what you want to try next, things you want to introduce, things you're interested in, things that you could change next time, is when you're lying in bed cuddling after you've had sex, because it's topical. You're not just bringing it up at a random time. And this is what I've always done when I have tried to teach guys to be kinky. It's like we'll be lying in bed after sex, not immediately after, like lying there cuddling in silence a little bit. And then when we start chatting again, I'll bring it up. And I'll explain what I do in situations like this, but this has more been with people that I'm new to dating, not people that I'm already in a long-term relationship with. But I would say things like, I really enjoy doing this. Is it something you've ever tried before? What are you into? Are there any fantasies that you like that you haven't tried before? One of my go-tos was always, can I teach you how to choke me properly? And as things progress, this is also my favorite way to kind of help things progress when someone is kind of learning to be kinky. Like we're lying in bed afterwards and I'll say something like, oh, I loved it when you did this to me. That was my favorite part. And then I'll say, when we were doing this other thing, it would be great if you could do it more like this, or you can go harder when we do that, or maybe we can try it like this instead next time. And then maybe something like, oh, I've been wanting to try this and I think it would be really fun to do with you. What do you think about doing that next time we have sex? I kind of like doing it as like a little sandwich. I'll say something positive and then give some feedback about how I might want things to be different next time. I never try to phrase it as like a criticism. I always try and say it like, oh, it'd be great if you could do it more like this. Or, when you did this to me, it felt a little bit uncomfortable. Maybe we could do it more like this. And then sandwiching it again with another compliment, saying something you enjoyed about it, or saying something that you are looking forward to trying next time. And especially when you're trying new things, I think it's really important and valuable to give that kind of immediate feedback right after you've had sex so that the person isn't left wondering if you enjoyed it or not. You should be explicitly communicative about what you did enjoy, what you didn't enjoy, and what can be different next time. Another way that can be nice to kind of bring up things you want to try is to reference it in like third-party media. So you could say, oh, I saw this movie with this crazy sex scene and I really loved it. Have you ever thought about doing something like that? Or you could text them and send them a link to something that you saw, a video clip, or even a porn film, being like, I saw this and it really turned me on. And if they respond positively, you could say, do you think you would be up for trying something like this next time we have sex? And then start the discussion about exactly what you want to do, especially if it's something more extreme when it comes to BDSM. You need to have really clear communication about what you want to do and what your expectations are and what you aren't comfortable with. Why don't we try it next time we have sex? And we could do it like this and this, or we could only do this small part of it and just start and try it and see how it goes. Another way you can do that is mention that you had a dream about it. It doesn't even have to be real. You can make it up and just be like, oh, last night I had a dream about this and this, and it was so hot. It turned me on so much. And then if they react positively to that, be like, do you think we could try that next time we have sex? Because this way it enables you to bring it up without immediately putting it on them. It's a more gentle way to bring it up than being like, I want you to do this to me next time we have sex. It gives them space to have a reaction to it first before bringing up the idea of you guys doing it together. I also recommend getting them to read the books that I recommended in my last episode, the new Topping book and the new Bottoming book by Dossie Easton and Janet Hardy. whichever role they are, I would suggest just buying them that book and being like, hey, can you read this? They're quite small books. They're very slim, easy to read. So I would suggest that as well. And maybe in reading those books, they might also get some ideas about what they're into. They might be like, oh, I read this part and I thought it was really interesting, or I read that part and it freaked me out. I don't want to do something like that. What would you recommend for first things to try for someone who has never tried BDSM but agreed with their partner to try? So this is super subjective, and I feel like it's hard for me to give advice on because my suggestions might be things that you guys are totally not into. I would just start talking about BDSM together. Ask your partner, like, hey, like, what appeals to you about this? Or have you ever had any fantasies like this? To kind of get an idea of what you each might be interested in trying. But if I had to say something as a starting point, things like holding down the other person's arms, hair pulling, spanking, using spit, those are all pretty easy things that you don't need any tools for. You could also buy some rope and just do like really simple ties to tie someone's arms to a bedpost or something like this. Don't tie their arms too tightly. You don't necessarily need special rope to do this if you're just doing something simple like tying their arms. And yeah, I mean, really just listen to your desires and what you personally feel curious about trying. And if you're not sure, start to do some research. Read about what other people are doing online or watch porn about it. Maybe read or watch with your partner and suggest, oh, that looks cool. Do you want to try that? And that was the last question. Thank you guys again for sending such cool and thoughtful questions. I loved answering these. I hope you have enjoyed this extra bonus episode this week. My name is Lucy Huxley. I'm a whore, and thanks for joining me in my bedroom.